A couple of weeks ago, I had a meeting in the clergy study in the rectory just there. My desk is sort of 90 degrees to the window, and the couch on the other side of the room faces the window. Courtyard, couch, desk. This woman came and sat on the couch. "Look," she said, pointing out the window. It was a gray day like this one. The magnolia tree was in full bloom. I looked out the window. "How can you just sit there?" she said to me. "Look at it. We should go outside." And so we both got up and we went outside. We looked at the tree for a while. I felt, in the best sense, kind of marvelously admonished in that conversation, not only by this wonderful person saying, "Do you not see the amazingness of this tree?" but also by the tree itself, just doing its thing. It felt in a way, especially after that conversation, that every minute that I did not spend time with that tree, especially in its full bloom, deluxe, natural splendor, I was kind of wasting my time. What else should any of us be doing, in some sense at least? And this tree in the courtyard, no matter what state it's in, and it looks a little bit different today, is a reminder to us all that nature does what it does, whether we are deeply attentive to its rhythms or not. It just does its thing. From an earth justice point of view, in a mixture of lament, respect, and hope, the author Robin Wall Kimmerer reminds us that even a wounded world will feed us. That's heartbreaking and a strange relief all at once. Stood in the courtyard when all its buds were closed up tight a couple of months ago. The tree had another message to bring. I was standing next to someone who'd come to the courtyard for church and for Sunday breakfast. And he looked at the tree and he looked at me and he said, "Spring is coming." That's not just the positive, great news of longer days, of better weather, maybe a bit more sunshine, more blossoms fresh in the air. For someone who sleeps on the streets, that means survival and hope on many levels. Spring is coming. Winter is a much more dangerous time. And so this morning, I got into the same room and I sat at the desk and I looked out at the tree, watching it shed its petals one by one. And I was thinking of all of the people, the thousands and thousands of people just over the last couple of weeks who, walking back and forth on Piccadilly, will have taken tons of photos and selfies. That tree is famous. That tree is now on Instagram accounts all over the world doing its thing, radiating its splendor digitally. One day, tree in full bloom, I walked past on Piccadilly with a colleague of mine who was taking a look, and I said, "What do you think?" And he looked at me and said, "I think it's camp." It's a pretty camp tree. They are not wrong. It is a marvelously flamboyant tree. It has big tree energy in a big way. And this tree and its abiding dark branches and its occasional flamboyant displays of joy across the year is doing something in the hearts of countless people that sometimes they can name and sometimes they can't. Today at St. James's, the Camino Companions group will meet this afternoon. And it's a group of people, around 45 of us, who spend time together every month looking at a particular theme, and then throughout the month in much smaller groups of 3 or 4, reflecting in more depth on whatever that theme has been month by month. And this month's theme is activism and liberation. There are many for whom faith itself is a protest or a risky political act. Resisting oppression and refusing the violence of dehumanization are Christian responsibilities. And in some strange way, plants teach us that too, fiercely embodying God's love with every cell as they push their way up through the soil defiantly. I think everyone has experienced in the middle of this city a wonderful moment of a rebel plant, even if it's a weed, perhaps especially if it's a weed, making its way through a crack in a concrete slab. Perhaps, as I have, you've thought to yourself, good for you. Do your thing. In our gospel today, Jesus speaks about death and life again, using a very powerful plant metaphor. He also speaks about himself and what will happen in relation to his death in Jerusalem, using powerful words from the Hebrew Bible, from Isaiah. And Jesus responds to the crowd, "When I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself." Which people? I think there's all, and then there's all. Jesus means all in its ultimate sense, not just the people we think of first, not just the people we know, and certainly not just the people we approve of, all. On Thursday evening, Rowan Williams gave a lecture nearby about ecclesiology, the church and the first centuries of Christianity, and he pointed out that the word ecclesia means church and also something like, in Greek, a citizen's assembly. To describe church community meetings in that way, 2,000 years ago, was highly subversive and possibly very confusing. Following Christ was not dependent on being from a particular religious, social, political, or economic group, then as now, though that is so easy to forget. Anyone and everyone could follow Jesus. It might be dangerous, it might be difficult to explain, it might be hard to bear, but it might also be wildly beautiful and liberating, and anyone could do it. Anyone could and can be a part of the citizens' assembly. But so many people in these places were not citizens. It's a very specific term. They were not citizens because, in this Roman context, they were enslaved, marginalized, dehumanized, and they too, everyone together, were in the ecclesia. Those who their political and social circumstances did not call citizens were citizens of the church and citizens of heaven. And that must be true for us today if church is to really mean anything in the world. And there are many, many forms of ecclesia now who have lost this crucial truth about the connection between community, God, justice, and dignity. It's a bit like perhaps the idea of a beautiful tree that used to bloom a long, long time ago. The tree is still there, but we haven't seen its flowers for a very, very long time. The thing about Jesus drawing all people to himself without exception is that it collapses the idea of insiders or outsiders. And so that principle is something that we need to use so that we can fight against the prejudices that are so core and so painful, those we recognize and sometimes those we don't recognize in ourselves all the time. Infinite love and dignity is for and with and in every person, as vibrant and as true and perfect as every plant and every seed. Tomorrow, the UK government will meet with the UN's Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities because of what the UN described as the UK government's grave and systematic actions against disabled people. This includes lack of access to basic resources, compounded by disabled people not having a voice in determining what changes could be done and what changes urgently need to take place. The UN determined quite a while ago that the UK had been in violation of these rights, back in 2016. The UK government has avoided being accountable ever since. They've done everything they can to not sit down and have this reckoning. There was meant to be a meeting in 2023. The government declined to attend and rescheduled it. And they rescheduled it for tomorrow. Hopefully, in that conversation, there will be wisdom, fairness, honesty, and the sacred truth formed by God through principles that we see in things like the gospel that we have with us today. The sacred truth of human dignity for all will be on everybody's minds and in everybody's hearts. God cherishes every person in God's ecclesia, in this citizens' assembly, and in heaven too. The divine community of all the saints is also an ecclesia, a citizens' assembly, people of every background, ability, social reality. Jesus speaks so often about assemblages of things, collections where teeny tiny things become extraordinary and grow together. And a lot of the time, the images that he uses and the examples that he uses come from nature. Seeds and trees, planting, growth, the natural cycles of death and life. Bread for more than 5,000 people. Seeing Zacchaeus in a sycamore tree and inviting him to come down and eat with him. The vine and branches as a way of describing Christ's relationship with his community. The cross, the weapon through which he dies, was once a tall, beautiful tree, cut and shaped involuntarily into an instrument of torture. As many of you know, across the coming year, we'll be exploring a theme together in church: imagine the world to be different. And we're doing it with gardens and dialogues and events and services that have a broad umbrella title called Conversations Under Trees. And there are so many examples in many different religions and in many different cultures of what can happen when people meet beneath the spreading canopy of a tree and have what can sometimes be a very risky, complicated, or difficult conversation. There is something about the setting, perhaps the dappled light through the leaves, through which something new can emerge. We have not called this conversations in boardrooms. This all began many, many months ago, and there was a bit of a milestone a few days ago with the launch of the St. James's Chelsea Garden project. And if you weren't here on Tuesday evening, don't worry, the whole thing was recorded, and you can watch it on our YouTube channel. The trees in the Bible can guide us in relation to what we might want to do, how we might want to build a community and deepen faith, within human and beyond human encounters. And the trees in the Garden of Eden, the trees in paradise with leaves for the healing of the nations, they are just a beginning. There are more places to go and more to discover. And it is in this local community context at St. James's when this morning, on the brink of Passiontide, we hear Jesus say, "Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. The word that we have here in English, remain, is a really important word in John's Gospel. In Greek, it's mene, which is sometimes also translated as the word abide. In this Gospel, Jesus uses this word in ways that are always making really strong connections between God's love and God's people. It's a word with a lot of weight, a lot of rich meaning. Abide in my love, Jesus says. It's the same word, mene. So it's odd the way that Jesus uses mene in our gospel this morning. It remains a single grain. So this would be like abiding alone. It doesn't make sense. You can't abide alone. So even the word that he uses anticipates the promise that when the little seed, which looks like nothing, drops into the soil and looks like it's gone forever, there will be growth which is not just for its own sake and not just in that tiny thing, but growth for a whole community in a way that's really, really beautiful. Something can't just abide by itself. The circle of life is not free from sacrifice or pain. Even the most terrible chaos and Christ's death within it will give birth to a liberating freedom that overcomes death itself. We're going to walk through some chaos together over the next couple of weeks. It will be a hard road if we're paying attention. And that's good. And it might be hard in different ways for each and every one of us, depending on what we're carrying when we walk that way of chaos. But it is not the end. The bread and the wine of the Eucharist is our way of connecting with the Last Supper in its deepest cosmic meanings and the love of Jesus. And I think this takes on an extra powerful layer of meaning as we enter Passiontide and move towards Holy Week and Good Friday. We say that it's the body and the blood of Christ. We say that it's the pure love of nourishment in the midst of a community that knows that there is chaos and chooses to believe that that is not the end of the story that we share. When you receive communion today, if you wish, keep this in mind. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, there will be much fruit. Amen.